Wow. Okay, you really weren't kidding about this one.
Oh, this is a big one.
A whole stack of articles about the future of EVs.
EVs, yeah.
And I gotta say, it's a little bit,
A little bit what?
well, exciting,
Right.
but also a little bit, nerve-wracking.
Oh, absolutely. Like the industry is at a crossroads.
Exactly. On one hand, you've got Gartner predicting this 17% jump in EV shipments just this year.
Yeah, 17% in 2025. That's huge.
And by 2030, they're saying over half of all car models
More than half.
could be electric.
Yeah, it's a bold prediction for sure.
But then, I'm reading about how all this excitement might hit some speed bumps,
Speed bumps. Oh, yeah.
thanks to governments changing the rules around emissions.
Oh, the regulation.
Yeah, it's like everyone's ready for this big race.
It's a race, yep.
But the starting line keeps moving.
Yeah, that's the problem.
So some car makers are getting a little hesitant.
Hesitant is putting it mildly. I mean, would you want to invest a ton in electric technology if the rules could change tomorrow and make all that investment worthless?
Good point. So it's less about the technology and more about the unpredictable rules of the game.
Exactly, and this isn't just happening in one country.
Oh no.
We're talking global uncertainty here, with trade barriers between the US, the EU, and China making things even more complicated.
Okay, so now we're adding geopolitics to the mix.
We are, buckle up.
How do trade barriers actually impact EV adoption, though?
Well, the future of cars isn't just about being electric.
Right.
It's about what Gartner calls CASE,
Yes.
connectivity, autonomy, software, and electrification.
So the whole package.
The whole package. And right now, you could argue that Chinese EV makers are leading in CASE advancements.
That's just it.
They're not just making electric cars,
Right.
but they're making them incredibly smart and connected, too.
I'll admit, I haven't been following the Chinese EV market that closely.
It's a fascinating space.
Why are they so far ahead, especially when it comes to the software?
It's their approach.
Okay.
Chinese automakers are often much more vertically integrated,
Which vertically integrated?
meaning they control more of the entire process.
Got it.
From designing the cars and manufacturing them
Okay.
to developing the software that runs them.
Ah, so they're like a one-stop shop?
Kinda. Think of it like Apple controlling the entire ecosystem, both hardware and software.
Makes sense. So no wonder they're so quick to innovate.
Agile. They are very agile.
But if they're so advanced, how are trade barriers a problem for them?
Because these barriers mean fewer people in places like the US and the EU can actually get their hands on these cutting-edge Chinese EVs.
Right.
It's not just about consumers missing out, though. These trade barriers could also slow down the overall pace of innovation globally.
Wow. Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
It's complex, right?
So we've got this huge potential for EV growth, but also these political roadblocks and kind of a global technology race happening in the background.
You got it.
What does all this mean for the more traditional car companies, the ones Gartner calls legacy OEMs?
Legacy OEMs,
Are
yeah.
they just sitting back and watching all this unfold?
Actually, they're not. They're making some pretty interesting moves. You might even say unexpected moves.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
A lot of these legacy car makers are realizing they're struggling to develop their own software for EVs.
So software is becoming just as important as, say, the engine.
Maybe even more so in the future.
And what are they doing about it?
Well, they're not giving up. They're adapting. They're forming partnerships
Partnerships.
with Chinese OEMs.
Really? That's surprising.
It is. They're recognizing the software expertise of these Chinese companies and saying, hey, let's work together.
That's a big shift. These companies have been rivals for decades.
It shows how much the industry is changing.
So it's not just about who can build the best car anymore.
No, it's about who controls the software, who can create the best user experience, who can integrate all this new technology seamlessly.
I see. So we've got this huge EV growth on the horizon, but also all these political tensions.
And a global technology race.
It's kind of making my head spin.
I know, it's a lot.
But there's one more thing that really caught my eye in these reports.
What's that?
This whole shift towards EVs could have a major impact on where cars are actually made.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to reshape the geography of car manufacturing.
That's what we're going to dig into next.
Let's do it. You're spot on. Get ready for a major shakeup in car manufacturing.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting.
For years, we've had this issue with car factories.
What kind of issue?
Overcapacity, especially in places like Europe and North America.
Overcapacity. I thought cars were always in demand.
They are, but the factories, especially the older ones, they're not making as many cars as they could be.
I see. So there's this potential to produce more, but they're not.
Exactly. And it comes down to the type of car.
Oh.
Traditional car makers have these huge factories designed for gas-powered cars.
Right, but that's changing.
It is, and as demand shifts to EVs,
Yeah.
those old factories are becoming less efficient, less profitable to run.
So it's not just about the number of cars.
No.
It's about whether the factory can keep up with the changes.
Exactly, and this whole overcapacity problem,
Yeah.
it's going to get worse because of those tariffs we talked about.
The ones on Chinese EVs?
Yep, those tariffs make it pricey for Chinese companies to export their cars to Europe.
So what are they doing?
They're getting smart. They're building factories directly in those markets.
So instead of shipping cars across the world and paying those tariffs,
Right?
they're just setting up shop right where the customers are.
Smart, isn't it?
That's actually a really clever strategy.
And it's shaking things up big time.
How so?
Think about it. If Chinese companies have their own factories in Europe,
Yeah.
and those factories are more modern, more efficient, pumping out EVs for less money, what happens to those older factories?
Not just in Europe.
No, in North America too.
Things aren't looking so good for them, are they?
Gartner predicts some of them might have to close down entirely,
Wow.
or they'll get sold off to other companies.
That's a huge change for the industry.
It is, and it doesn't stop there. It could have a domino effect.
Domino effect.
Yeah, think about all the companies that supply parts to those traditional car factories.
Okay, the suppliers.
If the factories shut down,
They lose their business.
exactly, they might have to close down too.
So we're talking about a chain reaction here.
Exactly, the whole map of where cars are made
Yeah.
and the people whose jobs depend on those factories.
Right. It's not just about the companies.
No, it's people's livelihoods.
This is a lot bigger than just a new type of car, isn't it?
It is. It could cause real economic shifts.
And job losses.
It's a valid concern, one that needs to be addressed, for sure.
So we've got these technological advancements,
Well,
geopolitical maneuvering, potential factory closures.
and a whole lot of uncertainty.
It's hard to keep track of it all.
It's a lot to take in, you're right.
But going back to something you mentioned earlier,
What's that?
Chinese companies taking the lead in software development for EVs.
Right, they are ahead in that area.
What do you think that means long term?
Well, software is becoming the heart of the car.
More so than the engine.
Maybe even more so, yeah.
So could we see a future where software defines the car?
That's a really interesting question.
More than the engine or even how the car looks?
You're thinking about it the right way. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about cars.
And who builds them?
Exactly. It's not just about the physical car anymore. It's about the brains behind it.
Okay, so the companies that are good at software,
Like the Chinese companies we were talking about.
they have a real advantage.
They do. They're going to be the ones shaping how we interact with cars, what features they have.
So it's not just car companies anymore.
No, it's more like mobility companies.
I like that. Mobility companies.
It's a whole new way of thinking about transportation. It really is a whole new world, and it raises a lot of questions.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about.
Like you were saying, what happens when software becomes the driving force behind cars?
Right, when it's not just about the engine or the design anymore.
It's about the code.
Yeah, and all that data the car is collecting.
Well, about the data, that's a big one.
If our cars become these giant computers on wheels,
Which they're basically becoming.
always tracking our movements, our habits,
Everything.
what does that mean for privacy?
It's a valid concern, for sure.
It's one thing to have our phones tracking us,
Right.
but our cars, that feels different.
It is different. Your car is like an extension of your personal space.
Exactly, and then there's a question of who owns that data.
That's the million-dollar question.
The car company, the software developer?
Maybe even the government.
That's a little unsettling.
It is. These are big questions that we haven't really figured out yet.
It makes you wonder if we'll need new laws to protect drivers in this digital age.
Like a digital bill of rights for cars.
Exactly.
We might need something like that. And then on top of the data privacy concerns,
There's more.
there's cybersecurity,
Right, because if cars are basically networked computers,
which they are.
they can be hacked.
That's the risk.
Imagine someone taking control of a bunch of cars remotely.
On a highway, yeah, that's a scary thought.
That's terrifying, actually. It feels like the stakes are getting higher.
Much higher. And not just for individuals.
What do you mean?
Think about critical infrastructure transportation systems.
Okay,
If those were hacked.
that could disrupt everything.
Exactly. So we need to be thinking about security from the start.
So it's not just about making EVs.
No.
It's about making sure they're secure and respect our privacy.
It's a whole new set of challenges. And, we were talking about car companies becoming mobility companies.
Right, I like that term.
What if, down the line, owning a car becomes less common?
You mean like people just stop buying cars altogether?
Well, maybe not entirely.
Right.
But what if we rely more on subscription services for transportation?
Like those car subscription programs some companies are trying out.
Exactly. Or imagine ride sharing, but with these advanced software-driven EVs.
Like Uber or Lyft, but even more high-tech.
Exactly. In cities especially.
Where parking is a nightmare.
And public transport is already pretty good.
Owning a car might not make sense anymore.
Right, it might even become inconvenient.
But wouldn't that be a huge shift for our culture?
It would, no question.
I mean, cars are so tied to our sense of freedom.
Independence, identity even.
It'd be hard to give that up.
It would be a change, but think about the positives.
Like what?
Less car ownership could mean less traffic.
True.
Cleaner air.
And we could use all that space for something else.
Parks, housing, anything.
So we're not just talking about a new type of car.
No.
We're talking about redesigning our cities.
Maybe even our whole way of life.
This EV revolution, it's bigger than I initially thought.
It is. It touches on so many aspects of our lives.
So for someone listening to all this,
Trying to keep up with all the changes.
what's the key takeaway?
Embrace the uncertainty.
Embrace the uncertainty.
We're in uncharted territory here. There's no rule book.
But we can figure it out.
We can if we stay informed, stay curious.
And keep talking about these issues.
Exactly. That's how we shape the future.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
Lots to think about. Thanks for guiding us through it all.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.